Good evening and welcome to AZ Votes Candidates in Conversation, a special edition of Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Tonight, we continue our Candidates in Conversation with Republican candidates for Arizona Congressional District 1, which covers northeastern Maricopa County and includes large areas of Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, and Fountain Hills. Now, Candidates in Conversation is not a formal debate. It's an open exchange of ideas, an opportunity for give and take between candidates for one of Arizona's most important offices. Interjections and the occasional interruption are allowed, provided that all sides get a fair shake, and we'll do our best to see that that happens. Joining us now for tonight's discussion, in alphabetical order, Jay Feely, a former NFL kicker and sports commentator, and John Trobaugh, a technology business executive. And we should note that candidate and former state representative Joseph Chaplick initially agreed to appear tonight, but earlier today he decided against participating. Gentlemen, good to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining us. Jay, I'm going to start with you. This is Arizona's wealthiest district. I mean, CD1, you got Scottsdale, PV, Fountain Hills. What is the most pressing issue in Congressional District 1?
Well, Ted, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with John as well. You know, sad that Joe couldn't make it. I wish him the best. I hope everything's okay. He was posting on X a little while ago, so I think everything's probably fine. For me, the most important pressing issue is still the economy, and it's affordability. And I think for all of us, we want to leave our kids and our grandchildren an economy that works for them, where they have hope for a future. And right now, so many young people don't have a hope for the future, and they worry about, can I provide for my family? And we have to create business atmospheres that are conducive to bringing businesses here, to creating more jobs, to bringing down the cost of, and affordability, and making sure that as Republicans and conservatives, we are providing a road map for the future for children, that they believe that our principles and our priorities are the right place to go. Because the other side, the alternative, is democratic socialism. And you look at Mamdani and the rise of Mamdani and what has happened to the Democrat Party, you know, since President Trump won again, they've moved further to the left. They've embraced AOC and Bernie Sanders as the face of their party, and that's going to lead to democratic socialism.
Most important issue in this district?
Yeah, I think the most important issue in this district is also the most important in the state, and why I got into this race, which is the Arizona economy in particular. Yes, I'm keenly interested in what's happening with the macroeconomics at a federal level, but Arizona is at a crossroads for the next 25 years. What happens over the next 4 or 5 years in Congress and our ability to take advantage of the massive technology growth and expansion that we have in Arizona is key. And that's why I got into this race, because I see an opportunity to help shape that for Arizonans and their families. I can't vehemently disagree with anything that Jay said. I think we both agree with many of the things and many of the supply side, you know, economic principles that he laid out. But for me, it's about driving the Arizona economy and how we're going to drive growth.
Was that issue adequately handled by the current Congressman, David Schweikert? And if so, how would you improve on that?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things, and I've met with David a few different times, and one of the things I really respect and like about David is that he is a fiscal conservative. And as a Reagan conservative, more of a traditional conservative, I identify with many of his supply side economic principles. We should have a balanced budget. We should address our debt. These are important things. But I think where I separate and where I differentiate from David is where Arizona is today. We are the gatekeeper to the global economy. And I don't think people understand that in Arizona or even nationwide. And I continually preach and explain to people why that is the case. It's a unique opportunity for Arizonans that doesn't present itself anywhere else in the U.S.
This is an opportunity. This is a Republican primary conversation here. It's an opportunity to, again, succeed. Congressman Schweikert, would you be an improvement over Congressman Schweikert?
Well, I think what we need most is we need somebody who has the ability to communicate. You know, when we lost Charlie Kirk, we lost the greatest communicator of conservative causes that this country had. And I don't believe anybody can step in and fill that void and replace him, but we do need people that are willing to stand in the gap. Being 10 years on broadcast TV, 3 hours every Sunday on national TV, certainly has prepared me for that opportunity. I love this country and I love this state, and I want to be somebody who advocates for it. You know, David Schweikert is the only member in Congress in Arizona on the House Ways and Means Committee, and we need somebody to step in who will be there and grow that economy and bring jobs here and make sure that we're at the forefront of this country when it comes to the new economic driver, which will be AI.
You mentioned Charlie Kirk. Do you think district Republican voters, Republican voters in CD1 is who we're talking about here right now. They want a candidate aligned with MAGA.
Well, I think they want somebody who is transparent. And they want somebody who is willing to communicate what they believe and stand behind what they believe. I'm proud that President Trump has endorsed me. I'm proud that he asked me to run in this seat. You know, that for 3 years they've been talking to me about running and asking me to run. And, you know, I had 2 kids at home in high school and didn't want to do it yet. This was a good time as we were going to be empty nesters and decided, yes, I'll do it now, because when he was shot, that was a big moment for me. I wanted to step up and stand in and say, I'll fight for this country and I'll fight for this state. And I think what people want is transparency. Whether they agree with you or not, they want you to be able to communicate. They want you to have conversations with people that you totally disagree with, which is what Charlie Kirk did. I'll sit down with anybody. You know, I sat down with you right here. You know, we're talking. And you know, I think you have to be willing to do that, and I think that's what voters want.
But is that what voters, Republican voters in Congressional District 1, do they want that kind of Republican representing them?
I think CD1 in particular wants a more traditional conservative. We want a Reagan conservative, someone who's a fiscal hawk, someone who understands supply side economics, someone who's getting back to the basics of common sense and balancing our budget, stop doing things that we can't afford to pay for, get back to America first policies, and let's drive our economy, both at a national level, but in Arizona. As I said, in Arizona, and Jay mentioned AI, you know, my background, I'm a former AI tech CEO. I understand AI, and AI is both positive and can be negative. And so from my perspective, I look at it and say, look, the right person for CD1 right now to navigate this and our future economic needs is me. But people want a common sense, traditional conservative, and that's what I represent.
I'm going to say that what they don't want is somebody who was a Democrat, and you were a Democrat by your own words. You worked in the Obama administration. You said you were proud as hell to work in the Obama administration. You called yourself an Obama baby. I mean, I don't think that Republicans here and conservatives here want somebody who is a California, Silicon Valley tech guy who called himself a Democrat and embraced those policies and now wants to revitalize himself as a Republican and a conservative.
Respond, please.
Well, I can see Mr. Feely's taking the gloves off and wants to start throwing punches versus kicking footballs. So let's be clear about a couple things. First off, what he's referring to is the fact that I was a Presidential Innovation Fellow, one of only 250 that we've had in the nation. And as a Presidential Innovation Fellow, it is a nonpartisan role. And I started under the Obama administration and was also there in the beginning of the Trump administration as well, and worked on China in the original tariffs with China, and how China was the largest venture capitalist in Silicon Valley and had faster access to defense tech than our own nation. So to me, this is not about throwing barbs about who's a Democrat, who's a Republican. Let's talk about doing what's best for the nation.
But you describe yourself as a Silicon Valley Republican. What does that mean?
I didn't describe myself as a Silicon Valley Republican. He called me a Silicon
Okay,
Valley
No, I
Republican.
said you were a Democrat.
No,
because
no,
you said
no,
you were
no,
a Democrat. You told your wife when you got to the Obama
Well,
administration.
we've all
you
seen
said,
your
oh, I thought I was a
pictures."
Democrat. Now I'm
Hold
a
on for just a
Republican.
sec. Okay,
So,
please.
you know, to me, that is not what's representative of the people here in Arizona and what they want from a conservative. They want somebody who believes in conservative principles and has lived that.
Let him speak,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. So first off, to your comments, your question, and then his
I've heard you
comment.
described as a
Yeah.
Silicon Valley Republican, and I've not heard you
Yeah,
say
I'm
that
not
you
even
weren't.
sure. I'm not even sure what that means as Silicon Valley Republican. I came to Arizona about 8 years ago because my wife's family was here to help with her family and to help with raise our kids with the grandparents. What a Silicon Valley Republican is, I don't know. I mean, that's something Mr. Feely would have to define. But
I'll
as a
define it for you.
Democrat,
That's
as
somebody-
Mr.
Hold on,
Feely,
let him go.
Mr. Feely is a self-described Democrat with pictures with him and talking about how great friends he is with Bill Clinton. So, you know, let's not talk about who's a Democrat, who's a Republican. Let's talk about policy. Let's talk about what's best for Arizona. We just got done saying people want to get back to common sense. People are tired of the negativity. People want to see real policy and real understanding. And I don't feel the need to get into the mud with a childhood fight.
Please.
Well, for me, I've never been a Democrat. I've never voted for a single Democrat. I've always been a conservative. I've always been a Republican. I will be honest about the people that we have in office. When I have problems with President Trump, I will talk about that. I will be honest about that. The things that I disagree with him, I'm okay talking about that. I'll talk to people that I completely disagree with, like I did with Bill Clinton. You know, the work that I did in Haiti with him When I put solar lights into a deaf village in Haiti, I'm very proud of that. You know, and they allowed us to do that and put solar lights into a deaf village to help those people that are in the poorest, worst part of the entire world. How I define a Silicon Valley Republican or Democrat, you have your pronouns in your bio on your social media still today, right now, on your Instagram and your LinkedIn. Like, that to me is not a Arizona Republican. That is not somebody who represents the people of Arizona.
But you were initially running as a CD5 Republican candidate, and you are now running as a CD1 Republican candidate. You dropped out of that race. You moved over to the CD1 by President Trump's suggestion. Why should Congressional District 1 Republican voters in this primary go for you when you were initially in another race?
Well, and I've lived in Gilbert since we moved out here. We moved out here in 2010 to play for the Cardinals. We decided to stay here, to raise our family here, to raise our 4 grandkids now. We love Arizona. And so that's where I was running. And when the president asks you to run in a different district, when he looks at Mr. Trobo and Joe Chaplik, No-Show Joe, and you know, he says they can't win, they're not strong enough as a candidate. They are not the right candidate in this race. We need somebody who's a better communicator, who's a better fighter, and I need you to run in this seat. And then the Speaker of the House reaches out and asks me to do the same thing. I said, yes, for the good of the party, I will move into this district, I will run in this district, and I will take on, you know, the slings and the arrows that people throw at me for moving in the district, because it's more important to me to make sure we keep the House in the midterms than it is anything that somebody's going to throw at me.
Carpetbagger
Mr.
or
Feely,
team player? What do you see?
Mr. Feely is a carpetbagger. He is chasing elections and chasing seats. He does not live in this district. He lives over an hour and a half away. He doesn't even understand the issues or show up to the LD meetings and talk with the people. Mr. Feely does not represent this district. In regards to his quote-unquote endorsement, the reason I got into this race is because Arizona is at a crossroads with our economy, and I looked at it and I said, we have an announcer and a football kicker with 0 business experience who's going to start to drive what the Arizona economy should look like. We have someone who is bought and paid for by Washington, D.C. We need independence. We need true conservative values who understand business and understand how to drive our economy. And my jump into this race was exactly because Mr. Feely does not represent any of those experiences. He is a non-qualified business leader. I still struggle to understand how being an entertainer qualifies you to talk. Hold on, qualifies you to talk about AI, other than the fact that you know how to spell it.
Please.
So for 14 years, when I played in the NFL, my teammates voted me and asked me to be their leader in the NFLPA. So I negotiated billion-dollar contracts with the NFL owners every year. When we had lockouts, I was at the Federal Mediation Building doing those negotiations, sitting on the opposite side of the table from those owners, which is why a lot of those owners have supported my campaign, because they saw somebody who was thoughtful, rational, and logical. I sit on the board of 2 companies right now, 2 public companies. Klein Tools, a 5th-generation company that does over $1 billion in revenue, a company here in Scottsdale, a defense company. I've started 2 companies as an angel investor in the health industry. So he tries to promote me as somebody who doesn't have a business background because I played in the NFL, but I broadcast for 10 years. I did something that is very difficult. You have to handle failure. You have to be able to communicate. You have to not care what people think about you. And I think that the voters in Arizona will appreciate that. And the last thing I would say is he was in the race. Joe Chaplik was in the race, and the President of the United States said, they're not good enough. We need you to run in this seat, Jay, and that's why I did it.
Is it a factor? Does it concern you that the President of the United States did not endorse you?
No, I think the President of the United States is going to endorse the individual that he thinks he can control the most. And I think having Puppet Feely, where I pull the string on the back to get the canned answer, is a great addition to the swamp in Washington, D.C. That is not who I am. I have spent, as he's talking about being on the sidelines calling plays, I was spending my time in the Middle East as a defense industry CEO, meeting with the intel community, talking about selling software and how it is we identify bad guys before they get to this country. So I appreciate negotiating entertainment contracts for football. That's a lot different than what my world experiences.
Ted, I would not
puppet on a string. I want you to respond to that.
Well, I wouldn't brag about doing business with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is what his company did when he was running it. You know, they provided intel so they could go after their dissidents and identify who they are and attack them. That is not what I would brag about. I would sit there and hide from that if I were him. You know, and as far as being a puppet, President Trump and I, our relationship goes back to before he even got into politics. We were friends when I was playing for the Jets in New York. And so our relationship goes way back. We've spent a lot of time together on the golf course down at Mar-a-Lago. They understand that I'm somebody who stands up for his beliefs. And they don't care that, you know, at some points I'll criticize the president if I don't agree with him.
What do you not agree with the president on?
Well, I'm somebody who believes in respect and believes that you can have conversations with people that you completely disagree with. I'll sit down with anybody. If MSNBC said, hey, I want you to come on right now, I would go on their show and I would talk. It's what I really respected about Charlie Kirk. Like, he was willing to sit down with Bill Maher. He was willing to sit down with Gavin Newsom and have those conversations. You know, and so that's an area where we disagree.
Real quickly, the Muslim Brotherhood accusation, you said that's a lie?
Yeah, that's an absolute lie. Look, this is Boeing. Boeing had brought a company that they had brought me in to turn around and give them options, and one of those things were to cancel, you know, previous contracts that the company had gotten into on behalf of Boeing. So that's an absolute lie.
I thought Gaddafi
but
was
that
the
also
previous
gets
one.
back to again his lack of understanding of business, much less national security. It's just completely beyond
Can I
his
ask you a
pay
question?
scale.
Didn't you have to
So-
step down from your company because you shared some of those national security secrets?
I have no idea what you are talking about. So now you're making things up, and now we're getting into the lies.
Okay, so I want to keep things moving here, and since business and the economy seems to be a focus here, and I would imagine for Republicans in Congressional District 1, it is a factor. We'll start with you. Tariffs. Is the president doing the right thing? If you were in Congress right now, would you hold the administration more accountable to things like tariffs?
You know, for 20 years, neither party was willing to take on our trade deficit. Neither party was willing to take on our massive deficit of $39 trillion. Neither party was willing to take on the fact that we have minus $23 trillion in investment into this country versus out of this country. When I was in high school, that was net positive. Only President Trump was willing to utilize tariffs as the force to force these countries to invest back into our country, to give us equal trade parameters, to make the NATO countries around the world, who we provide their defense for them, and they spend less than 1% of their GDP, to spend up to 2-3% of their GDP, 5% of their GDP. President Trump utilized tariffs to force these countries to come to the negotiating table. For 50 years, we had trade parameters that weren't equal. And thankfully, he was willing to take that on.
Are these tariffs, though, just another name for a tax on U.S. citizens when the price goes up on these things?
Well, we haven't seen that. It hasn't shown that. You had inflation that ran up to 9.5% under Joe Biden because they printed trillions of dollars. And when you print money, inflation is going to run up. And the reality is that inflation has stayed around where it was when President Trump got into office. Ideally, you want above 5% GDP and you want under 3% inflation. That's how we grow our way out of this deficit. You know, I think it's important to have an honest conversation about everything that's going on, from tariffs to Iran to Venezuela.
Right. I want to get back to tariffs here. I mean,
Yeah, let's get back to tariffs, because there's so much lack of understanding
Are
there. It's
tariffs a
important to
good
address
thing
it.
for this country?
So you need to understand why we did tariffs, first and foremost. First of all, you have to understand that over the last 50 years, we have played in what we thought was a fair global economy. But not everybody plays by the rule of law. What the president did was absolutely driven by national security and the fact that we had hollowed out our manufacturing. We had hollowed out our ability to even smelt aluminum for military and defense purposes. I view the tariffs as being about reindustrializing the U.S. for our own national security. Tariffs are a short-term thing. It's often referred to as modern supply side economics. To the question on inflation, they absolutely cause inflation. Anything above 2%, the Fed just came out and said 50% of that is directly attributable to tariffs. And it absolutely is a tax as well. So let's not mask it for being something that it isn't, but let's be honest about why we did it.
Do you agree with the
for
president
national security?
who says that we, as Americans, should be okay with this and we should stop complaining about increased prices that are coming, some increased prices that are coming by way of tariffs?
Well, so let's talk specific to tariffs, because you got into an affordability question there, and then also tariffs. Well, let's just take tariffs.
Well, they
I absolutely
can combine.
believe that tariffs are of great importance to our national security. And I believe that the president's done the right thing with tariffs to reindustrialize this nation for national security purposes. It actually goes back to his 2015 national security policy when he first called for this, which is why this is happening now. And being at the White House when all that 2015 policy was written, I understood this. So I support this, but I also believe that there will be a time where we will ease off that as we balance our trade, if you will.
The Iran war, is the U.S. better off now than we were before the war started?
The world is better off now than it was before the war started, because you had the foremost supporter of terrorism in the world in Iran, and the Ayatollah. When you look at the fact that they were willing to support Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and that they were going to fund them, and that they would promote the Hezbollah attacks, and they would promote Hamas and what happened on October 7th. I think President Trump deserves a lot of credit for doing something that he knew in the short term was going to be a negative for his ability to win in the midterms, because he knew that gas prices would go up and that inflation would go up as a result in the short term, and that he knew that energy costs would go up, and that was going to be a negative towards winning in the midterms. And he understands that if we lose the House, then the Democrats are going to impeach right away. And so you have to understand that he took action that was in the best interest to protect our country, even though it wasn't in his own best interest in the short term.
Do you believe that he believed that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz?
I think he has very smart people. When you look at Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, and you look at David Sachs, they understand what's going to happen. And they knew that the Strait of Hormuz, here's the thing, we didn't need it to be open. China and India are the ones that need it to be open, because that's where the massive amount of their crude energy comes from.
Are we better off now than we were before the war started?
A lot to unpack there. Again, misinformed on global issues. So are we better from a terrorist perspective? Yes, we all know that this has been an ongoing situation for the last 50 years. The timing of it's difficult for us to armchair quarterback after the fact, but I do agree with Mr. Feely's point on the fact that there was a lot to risk going into Iran so close to the midterms, that there is information on the table that none of us have visibility to on their ability to arm for nuclear weapons. In regards to where we are today, yeah, how we're going to get out of this, I don't know. Because look, at the end of the day, Republicans campaigned on the fact that it was about America first. Let's get affordability under control. Let's get inflation under control. We got to take care of our own house before we worry about everyone else. And so the timing of the Iran war, I take issue with, and I wonder, but again, I wasn't in the room, so I don't have access to all the information.
Gas prices up, regime hasn't changed. There's new faces, but the regime itself has not changed. We're basically blockading a blockade.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in the art of war. Again, is that something positive for this country?
Yeah, I don't think right now, I think the outcome for this is going to be difficult. I think the global community is going to have to step up, and they're going to have to address opening the Straits of Hormuz, because right now, this is not sustainable for the globe or for this nation.
Yeah, let me jump in on that. When you look at what he did in Venezuela and then what he did in Iran, President Trump was playing the long game. He was looking at the negotiations he's going to have with China this month. He was looking at the fact that we are competing with China in this next AI revolution and in this energy production race. And 20% of the oil that China brings in, of their crude oil, because they only produce 10% of their own crude oil in country. They have to import 90% of it. 20% came from Venezuela and Iran. So he chopped out a leg from China in what he did in Venezuela and Iran. And he understands that China and India are the two countries who benefit most from the Strait of Hormuz being open. So they need to engage in that process and help us. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make these countries in Europe, he's trying to make these two countries in China and India be a part of the process of keeping that strait open.
Look, this is where
10 seconds.
Yeah,
Make it fair.
We can't be the global police for everyone. We need to first address what's happening with us domestically, and then we need to get into these issues.
And we've got to stop it right there. Oh, we could go on forever. This is great stuff. We've all out of time now for 1-minute closing statements. And going in alphabetical order, we start with Jay Feely.
Well, it's great to be here. I think we need more people in office who are not politicians, who have already been successful, who don't need the office. That's why I decided to run. When President Trump asked me to run, I said yes, because the people of Arizona need people who aren't going to D.C. to enrich themselves, who truly want to go and be that civil servant. Not somebody like Joe Chaplik, No-Show Joe. You can go on our website. He missed more votes than anybody in the Republican House here in Arizona. Almost 500 votes. He missed more days than anybody else. He missed this debate here today. No-Show Joe Chaplik is not not the one that we want in office. I think John and I are similar in that we want to go there to serve the people. We are not career politicians. You know, I'm grateful to have President Trump's endorsement, and I'm excited to represent you in Congress.
All right, thank you very much. And now the closing statement from John Trobo.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you, Jay, for being here and the time today. So look, first and foremost, I would say to people that I'm a more traditional Reagan conservative, which is to say I believe in fiscal responsibility and supply-side economics and a balanced budget. I also happen to have a deep background in national security and AI. And where Arizona is today, that is what we need. We need to control our growth, and we need executives who understand and are willing to get engaged to help drive our economy. I am one of the few only conservative tech CEOs to ever go to Congress to help address these issues. I am not carpetbagging here from another district because I want to be here. I got into this race because I care about my family, and I care about your family, and I care about making Arizona successful. And that is my #1 priority. Arizona first.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ted.
Appreciate you both being here. We really do. Thank you. Our next AZ Votes Candidates in Conversation is this Thursday. It involves the Republican primary for Arizona Congressional District 5. That's at 5 p.m. and again at 10 p.m. here on Arizona Horizon. All episodes of Candidates in Conversation are live streamed on YouTube at AZPBS Now and can be viewed as well at azpbs.org. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.